Hello and welcome to the GoTechnology hub2 video tutorial series. These videos are intended to introduce you to the functionality of Wood's GoTechnology completions management tool, and the 100 series in particular is around setting it up for the first time. This is episode 101 and it concerns the Functionality Selector. So Functionality Selector is the document which we use to configure an instance or a project within GoTechnology hub2. Normally, when you're going through the process of filling in this Functionality Select document, you'd be doing it with somebody from Wood to assist. However, it's possible that you'll be doing it on your own. You might be wanting to do it ahead of time, or it might be something that you've had some previous experience with, so you feel confident enough to do that without anyone else helping you. It's also worth noting that this is the generic Functionality Selector. There are some client-specific variations, and this is the version which is accurate at the time this video was made. There may be changes which have made subsequently, or you may have an older version. But I'll talk through what it is at the moment, and we'll go through the process of filling it in. The first part of the Functionality Selector is actually an explanation. It tries its best to explain all the different options that you're going to be presented with later on, so that when it comes to the point of filling it in, it's a little bit less difficult. As you can see, the second section of it goes into the actual configuration. It asks you to put in the information that you need for each section. So if we start off at the top and we go through some of the explanation material, I won't read it verbatim because obviously you'll be able to do that yourself, but I will explain some of the things. So we start off with just an introduction to the tool itself. Then we go into what is one of the key parts of configuring hub2, which is familiarity with this 5-tier model. Now the 5-tier model, meaning the 5 different levels, is something that will come up again and again and again. It's useful if it's something that you get a good understanding of from the start, but if you don't worry about it. It will become more obvious as you tend to go through things. Basically what we have is we have within hub2 5 different levels, and these are the way that you organize your project. Now in this example here, we've come up with a fictional, slightly fantastical example of a space exploration company called AstroWorks. So that top level, level A, is the company level. And it's worth noting that these levels are labeled level A, B, C, D, and E. You can actually change those later on, but for the moment we'll just refer to them as levels A, B, C, D, and E. So level A is the company level, and that's for AstroWorks. Level B is the region, so you can see here that we've got AstroWorks Texas. This one's supposed to say AstroWorks Florida. We'll fix that, but for the moment just pretend that it does. So that's the region level. The next level down is the asset or facility level. Houston Research Facilities under Texas. Then we have a project level, and then after that a scope level. So as you can see, we've got these 5 levels here. But what is the difference between 5 levels? Well, effectively, as you go further down the levels, you get more into project-specific or execution-specific information. So right up at the top, level A, the company level, there's actually no information stored there. None at all. When you get into level B, which is the region or potentially the sector, you've got some of the information which we anticipate will be consistent or has the highest potential to be consistent over different facilities and projects. So what we're saying here for the level B here, the information that's set at this level is used by all of these here. The information that's set here is used by all of those there. So anything which is underneath this level B is going to take the information from there. So what we can see for that is disciplines, drawing types, ITR classes, etc., etc. That's what's set here. So if we come up with a list of disciplines that's let's say A, E, and Z, when we set it there, everything underneath that, they will have the disciplines A, E, and Z. And similarly, over here, we set a discipline list that's B, F, and M. All of these all of these below here will also have that discipline list. So the information flows down the way, and as you go further down, you get further options. So we can see that the information we're storing there is quite high level, and it's the sort of thing that would expect to remain consistent. When we get down to level C, we start to get more into information that's going to vary. Level C is the facility level. So level C is intended to represent the actual physical asset or installation at which the work is being done. And that is what dictates why this information is stored at that level. So you can see here, level C facility. What we've got here, we've got a Houston Research Facility, so like a building or a campus of buildings in Houston to do research. Over here, we've got a Cape Canaveral launch site, so that would be the actual area where rockets are launched in Florida. And then we've got just a storage warehouse that's in Florida as well. So because of that, we know for a fact that the Houston Research Facility, which is in Texas, and the Cape Canaveral launch site, which is in Florida, those are going to have completely different layouts to them. The equipment that's stored in them is going to be different. The systems and subsystems obviously are going to be different. There's going to be different cables in there, etc., etc. And you can see that's reflected here. You can see that things like areas, the people who work there, authorized persons, cables, the drawings, equipment types, the actual certification they use, all these kind of items which will refer or take a lot of input from the physical facility, from physical layout of the facility. Those are all defined at level C because level C represents that physical structure or installation. Down at level D, we've got what we call the project level. You could call it something else. But basically, here is where we're trying to group together scopes of work. So, for example, here you can see we've got 2 level Ds in the Houston Research Facility, new jet propulsion system, and in-flight navigation upgrade. So it's a way of saying, okay, there's going to be different scopes of work we're going to be executing for these, but the general kind of purpose of them is this. And that there's no actual information, no data stored there. There are configuration options and there will be permission options, which we can touch on later, but there's no actual data recorded there because the next major place that we record data is actually the last level, which is level E. Now, level E is all about the actual execution of work. So at the Houston Research Facility, we've got different projects going on and different scopes of work going on. They're held in the same physical space, but they are different items of work. They might be scheduled differently. They might be due to be done at different times. They might be done by different people. So they'll use all the information that's at level C and level B, like the area that it's going to be done in, the cables, the drawings, the systems and the subsystems, because anything which is done at this research facility is going to have, it's going to be in the same space. So it's going to need access to that same information. So we want all that information to be the same, no matter what scope of work it is we're doing. What we don't want it to share, though, is actual information about how that scope is progressing. So we don't want to have, if there's different ITRs, for example, being signed off here, and someone signed off something here, we don't want that sign off to suddenly turn up over here. We want that to be separate because they're being run separately. And that's kind of reflected in the sort of information that we store at level E. So we've got things like activities, which are planning related, as-built drawings. We've got the handovers, job cards, operations, punch lists and punch list items, ITRs, preservation work lists, and work packs. So all the information about, well, this has been signed off, this hasn't been signed off, this is upcoming, this is not due for a while. That's all stored at this level E, level. So the idea behind this 5-tier structure is to put as much flexibility and reusability in there as possible. However, it's worth noting that if this is your first project, it's likely that you'll have just a level A, B, C, D, and E just as one. So there'll be one level A, one level B, one level C, one level D, and one level E. So don't get worried too much about the complexity at this stage. Where it really comes in handy later on, as more projects are developed to use GoTechnology in your company or organization. You can Either set them up completely separately again, so you could have another B, C, D, and E, or you could say, well, this is at the same facility. I don't need to reload this information again. I don't want to. I want it to stay consistent with what we've done before. So then you just either create a new level D or a new level E underneath that. You'll instantly have access to all of this information. On the other hand, if there's another part of a company which is maybe geographically distinct, or if it's in a different part of the world, or alternatively it's in a completely different sector, maybe you work in the nuclear sector and they work in the renewable sector, oil and gas, we want to set that up likely under a completely different level B, because you might have different disciplines, you might have different test pack types, you might have different ITR classes. So having the ability to segregate out, it's not enforced, but it just can help you as your organization's use of GoTechnology grows. Going on to handovers, there's an explanation there of what handovers do in the basic sense of it, which is that they're there as certificates, which are gates at the end of a process. But the important thing to understand is, how do we actually configure these within GoTechnology hub2? And there's 3 components that we want to pay attention to. First off is the name. So what are we actually calling the handover? Hopefully that's something which is going to be fairly obvious to you. Then after that, there's the 2 which are need a little bit more explanation. What we've got there is grouping and gating. So let's imagine that we've got a handover called MC DAC. Now that's a mechanical completion discipline acceptance certificate. It's fairly common, particularly in oil and gas, so you might be familiar with it, but if not, don't worry, I'll explain it as we go through. So let's say that we've got this MC DAC, and it's the first handover we need to do. So if we're looking at our project from a left to right perspective, then that's going to be the first piece of documentation of certification which we're going to get to. The first milestone for us is going to be getting our MC DACs done. So what is it we're handing over at MC DAC level? Well, in general, you are doing a handover of subsystems by discipline. You're doing mechanical completion, which is usually done at subsystem level, and you're doing it a discipline acceptance certificate, so you're doing it by discipline. So what we have here in the groupings is a grouping for that. What we're saying for our grouping is what kind of work is it? What's the scope here that we are handing over? Are we handing over a subsystem? Are we handing over a system? Are we handing over a subsystem and discipline combination? Are we handing over a level E? So are we handing over an entirety of effectively, this sub-project? So we're doing everything. That would usually be what comes last. What is it that what's encompassed in this? Now the next thing is the gating. The gating is the which and when of a handover. So we're saying, okay, we're handing over this entire subsystem by discipline. Which of the certification, which of the documentation within that is being included in this? So normally, the way it would work is that we would use gate 1 for a construction ITRs, and then we would use gate 2 for pre-commissioning ITRs, so you might know them as A sheets and B sheets, and then potentially you might have gate 3, which is for operations or for dynamic commissioning. It's sometimes called C sheets as well. The next section is around sign-offs. You can set up default sign-offs within hub2, and that's something that you'll see more of as we get more into the actual kind of setup part of it. But the key thing here is that when we are doing, when we're setting up these sign-offs, which are used on things like ITRs and punch lists, there's some options around how we can configure those. You can either have a sign-off as optional, required, or complete, and I'll talk about that a little more when we get to the actual setup. The final section to explain is around preservation. There's a few options around preservation. Preservation is obviously the task that you do when equipment's unused and you're doing maintenance. So it's not maintaining active equipment, it's maintaining equipment which is not in use at the moment to make sure that when it comes time to use it, everything's great. There's two major differences in how you can do things. You can either advance your preservation on due date or sign-off date. So let's say that you have a piece of equipment which is due to be preserved on the first of the month, and it's due to be done once a week. So when you do it on the first of the month, the next time it's due, 7 days later, it's the 8th of the month. Okay, but what if you signed it off a day late? So now you've signed it off on the 2nd of the month. When is it due next? Should it still stick to the original schedule, which would mean it was due on the 8th? Or should it move, because you signed it off a day later, the next sign off should be a day later? That's the advance on due date versus advance on sign off date. Do you want your preservation schedule to kind of slip and adapt, or do you want it to stay to the same, schedule? And if you go advance on due date, then it will stick to the same schedule. So if you sign it off on the 2nd or the 1st, it was due on the 1st, so the next schedule is the 8th. Now, if you do it on advance and sign-off date, if it was due on the 1st and it was 2nd that you sign it off on, well, a week later is the 9th. Okay, so it's moved now a day later. That would mean that on the 9th, if you signed it off on time, it would be the 16th, but if you signed off on the 10th, it would be the 17th, and so on and so on. Now, this is something that we can change later on, as with most of the options in the Functionality Selector, not all of them, but most of them. And sometimes what will happen is there will be a switch from one to the other. If things are getting out of control and somebody started off on advance and sign off, they might move back to advance on due date or vice versa. And also there's preservation window before and after, and that allows you to restrict how early and how late before and after the due date it's possible for people to sign off. So for example, if you wanted to say, well, you can't sign off on any day apart from the due date, it has to be signed off on the due date, otherwise you've missed it, then we just would choose 0. On the other hand, if you said, well, you can sign off a day early and maybe 2 days late, then we'd have 1 and 2. And that's the intro section. So now we can actually go through and do the setup. So the first thing we see is choosing what kind of structure we're going to have. Now, like I said, it's usually the case that for your first ever setup, you are just going to be using a kind of one-to-one relationship. You're not going to go and set up millions and millions of things, because at this stage you've only got one project, and to be honest with you, it's the best way of doing it. You don't want to try and run before you can walk. So all we've done is we've put the very old tutorials, and like I said, usually in this process you'll have somebody talking you through it, so yeah, that's worth noting. So client name, we know who the client is here, it's Wood. My name is Josh, and Josh, also the focal point. Location here in beautiful sunny Aberdeen. We're going to use the Wood certification set. So the certification set is the ITRs and the handovers, the documents that you're going to use. It's possible that your organization, particularly if it's a larger organization, has its own set of documentation. They have their own library of commissioning, completions related certification, in which case you just tick this one instead, and we would like it if you could provide us examples, just so that we can make sure that there's not going to be any issues in utilizing those certificates. And if you want to use them for a mobile device, there is going to be some work involved in doing some conversion, but hopefully your contact point at Wood will discuss that with you. So for us, we are going to be using the Wood logo, and the left logo is going to be the Wood logo, and the right logo, we're just going to leave it blank. So we were talking about some handovers. What we'll do is we'll go with MC DAC, and we'll choose a subsystem discipline, and we'll put that at gate 1. And then what we'll do is we'll go with an MCC, and we'll say that's a subsystem. That is also gate 1, and I think after that we'll just go with, let's say, RFCC, and we'll say that is at subsystem level. Apologies if I'm getting any of this terribly wrong for any of the completions and commissions professionals out there who are screaming at their monitor right now. We've got, those will do for an example. What we've got next is default sign-offs. So this goes back to what do we actually want to use as the sign-offs. So let me pull up an example of VITRs that we use in Wood, and you'll see kind of what I mean. So if we pull up this ITR here, so this is a kind of check sheet. You're probably familiar with these. This is a civils check sheet that one of the guys or girls will go out and complete when they are looking at earthworks excavations, and there's the task that they're going to complete. And you can see at the bottom, these are the sign-offs we're talking about: completed by, accepted by, and approved by. If we have a look at a different ITR, this is the drilling ITR. This is a drilling top drive, including dolly retract, very important. And if we look at those sign-offs, because the checks themselves are obviously different, because this is a drilling one and the other is a civil one. We look at the sign-offs there: completed by, accepted by, and approved by. That is the same as here. Now, later on, we're going to configure individual ITRs, but if there's content in there which is very similar, which is always going to be, or almost always going to be the same, wouldn't it be a lot easier if we could just set it up in one go, right? And I can tell you that about 90% of the ITRs in the Wood suite use those same three sign-offs: completed by, accepted by, and approved by. Now, if we go and have a look how many there are, so we've got, just in the standard greenfield set, we've got 561 ITRs. So we could either set that up once, or we could set up 561 times. We want to set up once, and that's where the default sign-offs come in. So what we do here is we can say, what are the majority, hopefully the vast majority, of your ITRs going to use this sign-off? Is there a corporate standard? For us, that corporate standard is the completed by, accepted by, and approved by. So I could just tick this, but I'm not going to, because I want to show you what we would be doing. So we go with completed by, because that's the first one. The next one's accepted by, and approved. And notice I didn't put by there, because by is going to be default, so just completed, accepted, approved. So which is the one in here which is going to give us the credit? Which is the final sign-off? For us, it's approved by. So whatever the last sign-off, the last required sign-off is going to be the completed one. And then before that, are these both required? Do we need them? Yes, so they're required. So that means that you have to sign off completed by, you have to sign off accepted by, and then you can sign off approved by. And only at that point is it counted as done. You get the credit for doing the work. It will show up on the graph as a completed. So that's the final one. It's possible that you might have a different setup. Yours might be completed by, accepted by, and then verified by, or sample audit check, something like that. In which case, you're saying there's going to be a final check, or there's an option for a final check, but it's not actually going to be done to everything. It's only going to be done to some of them. The actual one where we're complete is this, accepted by. So you can only have one completed in there, and you're saying that this is not a required sign off. So that's where optional comes in. So what you're saying there is, it's necessary for somebody to do the work. They have to complete it, obviously, first, and then we need somebody to accept it. And once it's been accepted, that's when it counts as completed. And then there may be some checks later on. And if something has been part of this sample audit check, we want to be able to record it, but it's not essential, so it's an optional one. And that is basically the same thing for everything. So if you can kind of understand that concept, then you've understood the majority of what the Functionality Selector has in it. Beyond that, we've got some last additional features in there. And this is aliasing. So aliasing basically means renaming things. So at the start, I told you about level A to E. We could alias those if we wanted to. So we could say A, company, B, region. And then through that, we're saying, but when people look on screen, it doesn't just say level A, which might seem kind of meaningless. It'll say company or region. And similarly, in there, if you wanted your system group to be to be called something else other than system group, maybe it was going to be called, I don't know, system pack, for example, or super system. You could do that, and then on screen, instead of being system group, it'll be super system. Let's get rid of those, though. because we don't actually want to call anything anything. So preservation, do you want to use preservation? You might already have another preservation system in there. You might want to keep things simple. For us, we are going to say that we do want to enable preservation, and we want it to progress on due date. We want it to be kind of static. And we're going to have 1 day before and 1 day after. Next one is authorized person signatures. Do we want to store people's signatures as images in there? In that case, when we generate out documentation, it will take that image file and it will display it in that signature box. So that can help in certain situations where there's a requirement for some kind of signature to be shown on screen. We don't require that. For us, everybody's authorization is based on their digital access, their ability to log in, so we don't need an actual signature to be disabled. We do want commissioning procedures, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. We want to have the ability to have X-rated information in there, and we want materials. I don't want certification grouping. Certification grouping is an alternative way of doing MC DACs, actually, where you have a register for them. Unless you specifically know that you're going to need to do DMCCs, DMC1s, or MC DACs in a different non-standard way, just ignore that one. If you need to use it later on, if we realize that the way you've got things set up means that this would be helpful, we can turn it on, but we don't want to confuse things if we don't need to, so let's turn that off right now. I don't want to auto number punch lists. If you do, then your options are to put in some fixed text before, so like PL, and afterwards, P for some reason, and the number length, you could say it's going to be a 5-digit number in the middle, and you can choose whether it forces people to choose that, which would be strict. It enforces the format, but you can change things like the number and the actual prefix and suffix letter, or you could have no enforcement at all, but for me, I don't want to do that. We just want to be able to number our punch list items as we do them. This one is one that often gets misunderstood. Punch list configuration, 1 tier or 2 tier. What this means, some people think, is that mean that it's A items and B items? No. And we'll get into that later on, but no, it doesn't mean that. What it means effectively is, do you just have one big long punch list? So all you're doing is going around raising punch list item, raise a punch list item, raise a punch list item, raise a punch list item, or do you want to have to raise a punch list, assign like 4 items to that, then raise another punch list, assign 12 items to that, and raise another punch list, add 6 to that? Normally what we see is that 1 tier tends to be used for new builds, for greenfield projects, and 2 tier is more commonly used on brownfield or existing facilities. And then you can have the raising the punch list for a system. For each system has a punch list. I want to do 1 tier. And then we get into auto allocation. This is something we'll talk about a little bit more once we get into the actual populating of the data. But basically what this is every tagged item has an equipment type. That equipment type is a kind of general classification of what that piece of equipment is. So you could say, well, this is, for example, a certain type of alarm. We know that every tagged item, every piece of equipment that's of that equipment type is going to need these 3 particular check sheets in them. So this will save us time. It means that as soon as we load that tag in, it'll automatically get assigned the correct ones. So what we'll do is we'll do on tag added, which is the simplest way. That means that when we add a new tag, those ITRs will be allocated. We could have it that it's allocated when it's added, and then if you change things later on, it'll reallocate them. The only issue with that is if somebody makes a mistake in doing the allocations, then it could be kind of a silent change. So I would normally go with that one for the first project at least, and then perhaps later on, if you want to save time and you're planning on doing a lot of changes to your equipment type, if you realize that your equipment types are wrong, then we can enable this. You can also have advisory only, in which it doesn't actually do anything for you, but there's a little warning on the tag screen saying, this doesn't match your equipment type to ITR matrix, or you can have it off. Same thing with preservation. Primary and secondary handovers we don't need. And that's it. that is the functionality selector. This would be the part that you would sign off here, client. You put your name and a date and then just sign it. That's the part which I would sign, and then our commercial team sign that. Hopefully this has been useful. This is just the first video. Don't worry if some of it doesn't make sense. That's probably just the way I've explained it. And as we go into further videos and go through the actual process of populating the information, hopefully it will start to become clear. Thanks very much.